Welcome everybody. Dr. Erik here with Thrive Health Systems. Today we're going to be talking about stress. Now, how many of you are under stress? I have an opportunity to speak to a lot of people in our community here in Colorado Springs about stress. And you know, it's really interesting. When we ask the question, who's under stress? Everybody raises their hand. We'll go through a mild, moderate, severe and ask which one were you under in the last year? Most people will say severe. It's true not just here, but it's true all over the nation. Stress is something that's very prevalent. People are dealing with it in many, many forms. But today we're going to help you become the champion of your stress, conquer stress, make stress your friend. In a situation of stress, there's two types of stress. There's distress and there's eustress. Eustress is the kind of stress that keeps you going. It's actually healthy for you. Studies show that it's good for your heart. Distress, in fact, will kill you. Now, the CDC has come out and talked about stress and says that 94% of disease comes from stress. I didn't believe that myself until I started to experience it. Now, I'm a chiropractor by trade. I started my journey in chiropractic when I was 9 years old. My mother was a very forward-thinking person. You know, she was breaking horses all the time, training horses. Many times they were breaking her. And she thought, you know what? If this worked for me, it's going to work for you. I suffered from migraine headaches every day of my third grade life. Truth is, I don't remember anything from the third grade except for the days of the week in Spanish. I'd get to about that point, sitting on our little cute mat, and then I'd check out. I'd go home, or I just wouldn't even show up. The problem with that was my father was a school teacher in that same school, so he just, I think, pulled some strings and passed me on. This whole setback was, for me, a big deal. So my mother took me to the chiropractor. Went to the chiropractor, found out that was really out of alignment, and we were able to trace it back to an event that happened when I was 2 years old. I fell off of a roof. You might be asking, what was I doing on the roof? I followed my dad up there. At 2 years old, you don't remember much, but I do remember my dad turning around and very excitedly, almost in a panic, saying, "What are you doing up here? Get down." So I turned around, went forwards down the ladder, just much like you would a set of stairs, and that was about as far as I went. Down I went, landed on my head. Now, fast forward to when my mother took me to the chiropractor. It changed my life, changed my world, and those problems, much of them went away. When I got into grad school, I started to experience stress firsthand in a big way, and all those problems came back with a vengeance. And my life changed again, but for this time for the worst. It started out with a full body rash. Nobody knew why I had it. I had a large lymph node growing off the side of my neck that was non-tender and non-mobile. Anyone who knows about lymph nodes knows that that's not a good sign. And so many of the doctors around me were starting to entertain ideas of Hodgkin's lymphoma, things like that. Around that same time, my legs started to burn randomly from the hip all the way to the knee. And what was interesting about that is that they then started to entertain the ideas of MS. Nobody knew where these things were coming from, but around that same time as the rash, the burning in the legs, and the large lymph node, I started to have numbness on the left side of my tongue. All of this started as a result of what we actually trace back to stress. Now, at that time I checked out this large book. It was a Harry Potter type book. Old, dusty, had to blow the dust off. You opened it, cracked the spine. People started making fun of me all the time for carrying this thing around because I had it with me all the time. But as I read, as I got deeper and deeper into what we know now as the father of stress, Hans Selye, as I got into his book, I started to realize all of my problems were coming from stress. I was redlining it. What we found as we've spoken to a lot of people is that most people who are under stress are redlining it. And so I want to talk to you today about what I discovered and how I changed my life through chiropractic to totally abolish the distress and to become a champion of eustress. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of stress. All right, there's a few things that happen with stress, and we talked about distress and eustress. Only one of those is going to kill you. Now let's be really clear though, starting out, with what the difference really is. Take a lion and a wildebeest, for example. Two types of stress occurring at the same time, but one is under eustress, one is under distress. The lion is under eustress. He's chasing his dream. The wildebeest, he's under distress. He's running from discomfort. And that essentially, when you boil it down to people terms, is the essence of stress. If you're under eustress, you're chasing your dreams. You're staying up maybe a little later than you should, but you're writing that last chapter in your book that comes out next month. If you're the wildebeest, you're staying up late because you got no satisfaction out of today. And you got to stay up late, even stealing from tomorrow, before you call it quits today. Netflix is your best friend. A tub of ice cream is very familiar. Again, distress will kill you for many, many reasons, but most of it comes with our coping mechanisms to get through it. So at the very essence of stress, everything about stress is good. Okay, so there's 11 things that happen during stress. For one, the pupils dilate. Why do the pupils dilate? Well, the eyes are going to dilate because you want to see your world in high definition. There are many metaphors for life here. When you're stressed out, it activates a portion of your brain called the amygdala. It's the most animalistic part of your brain. And when it's triggered, you don't think clearly. You actually don't use much of your prefrontal cortex at all. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that sits right up here in the front. It's your worry, it's your foresight, it's your judgment center. And we're really good as humans at doing that. In fact, it's the one thing that differentiates a human from an ape is that we actually have worry, foresight, reason, judgment. And the thing is that if we're always loading that thing down, we're going to end up with anxiety, depression. The brain becomes very out of balance. So the eyes dilate when you're under stress. You want to see the world in high definition. You want to see the world up close. You don't want to miss a hole, a bush, a rock. If you're that wildebeest, you got to see the world up close. But the problem is you don't see things afar off very well. And this is a metaphor for life. When you're under stress, your amygdala, the very most animalistic part of your brain, is active, and it shuts down the most human part of your brain, which is the worry center, foresight, judgment, and reason center, called the prefrontal cortex. Now, when you're stressed, you're more likely to say things you regret. You're more likely to ruin relationships, less likely to plan vacations, and try and focus on just the here and now. The longer we stay there, the worse things get. But those eyes being dilated is only part of the problem. If they stay that way, you can develop nearsightedness. That's exactly what happened to me as I was in college. My eyes became blurry. I couldn't see the projector that the professor was using. I thought it just because I had read so many books that I had worn out my eyes. I had actually met my quota, I thought. The truth is, it was because I was constantly in a state of fight and flight. The second thing that happens is your lungs expand. Now, for obvious reasons, you want more oxygen if you're the wildebeest running from the lion. But think about this. If the lungs are expanded, the bronchioles are wide open, we are more susceptible to everything that's going around. That's viruses, that's bacteria. No wonder that when we're stressed out, we have lots of deadlines, projects due, that we are more susceptible to come down with whatever's going around the office. The third thing that happens is the bowels slow way down. They become more sluggish. All of the blood that's in your intestinal tract gets shunted to the large muscle groups so you can fight and flee. Over 90% has been reported of constipation being traced back to stress. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I'm constipated, but I'm not stressed. Or, I'm stressed, why am I not constipated? We'll get to you in a second. The next thing that happens is your muscles become more tense. Even trembling can occur. Some people have noticed that their hands are always cold or their feet are always cold. This is actually a stress response. If that's going on with you, a lot of times people associate that with thyroid, that inward tremble that doesn't seem to go away. And it is related to thyroid. We're going to talk about that today. The next thing that happens when you're under stress is blood vessels constrict. You get some vasoconstriction in some areas, vasodilation in others. The major muscle groups, those blood vessels going through your legs, your arms, they're going to dilate big time. But the blood vessels in your brain, the blood vessels other places that have to do with reproduction, those are all going to shrink down. And stress is really just to keep you in survival mode. The next thing that happens is your stomach, the digestive enzymes nearly shut off entirely. And this is important. Your body, when you are worried about not becoming lunch, the last thing your body's worried about is digesting lunch. This has to do with a lot of acid reflux. Again, over 90% of acid reflux has to do with stress. You probably remember back in the day, in the 90s, there's a commercial of a guy who is buying a chili dog, and he's got a newspaper under one arm and a briefcase under the other, and he's trying to pay the guy. And in the background, you hear this little ditty. The way this life gets going, you got to grab your food and go. It's all about eating and running. And this is a story about acid reflux. This guy has massive heartburn. Now, there's two reasons this could be occurring. One, he's under a lot of stress. His body is not in digestion mode, and it won't digest that food. Two, he's eating a chili dog. It's not real food. His body's trying to send it back, right? So acid reflux, big time. Again, heartburn, big time. That's a stress-related issue. All right, your heart beats harder and faster for obvious reasons. This is something that you'll notice that if you're driving through traffic and you have a near miss, your heart will just get going. And you almost have to pull over to let the thing settle down. There's no reversing it. It has to beat itself. It's just something that has to pass. Now, the last two things are pretty interesting. The blood flow to the skin nearly shuts down entirely. Now, if anybody's ever scared you or you've seen this on TV and somebody says, "Look, you look like you just saw a ghost," this is why. Now, if you're the wildebeest, you don't want to catch a claw and bleed to death on your way to safety. But again, if this goes on long term, we end up with problems. There's a disease called Raynaud's syndrome. And Raynaud's is an autoimmune disease where this has been present for way too long and the body's turned its immune system against self. Now, it's very patriotic. Your skin becomes red, white, then blue, and mostly in the hands or the feet. But it hurts and it feels like you're frostbit at 60 degrees. Not a fun ordeal. The last thing that happens is your saliva flow decreases. That's true also for your tears. Your eyes become dry, your mouth becomes dry, and even areas of reproduction become dry. This is a big problem, and it's very prevalent in our society. Many people who are dealing with chronic stress lack intimacy in their lives as well, just because the areas that revolve around that just don't work. So if this goes on too long, much like the last thing we talked about with Raynaud's, we have something called Sjogren's. Sjogren's is where your eyes and your nose and your mouth dry up. And this is just a chronic dry eye issue that many people don't even realize they have, but they're using eye drops all the time. Now, all these things you might think, Dr. Arda, these things sound crazy and they sound really bad. Well, they are. But in the short run, it'll save your life. Again, back in the 90s, there was a woman who picked up a car off of her child. Now, when I speak to people about this, oftentimes I'll ask them, do you remember that story? They'll say, yeah. So remember what kind of footwear she was wearing? I get all sorts of answers, and then one person usually remembers. She was wearing high heels. Now, I've tried to pick up cars before. Back in high school, we used to pick up cars and stick cars between trees, but it used to take 6 or 7 guys to pull a prank like that on a friend. This woman picked up a car by herself. Why was she able to do that? There's one thing that made it possible. And you might be thinking already, adrenaline. Now, all of these 11 things we just talked about all come from the adrenal glands. They are the lead dog. Now, between men and women, if we were to ask people, who's under more stress? And we took a poll, say 2,500 people were polled. Who do you think would say they've been under more stress? It's always women. Now, that's not to say anything of their strength or their character, but it is to say women are wired differently than men. In fact, from birth, they're more intelligent. They have more neurotransmitters. They have more connectivity in the brain. And across the board, they relate to their surroundings much quicker and better. They're aware of everything going on around them, far and away better than men. But who do you think dies more readily from chronic disease? Men do. Until recently, we found out that women passed men in one category of disease. And you've probably guessed it, heart disease. Now, why is that? We may not know entirely. But one thing we do know is that the brain is connected to every organ in the body. In the body's nervous system, there are wires all over the place. But there's something special called a synapse. And a synapse essentially is where one nerve stops and a new nerve starts. And everything inside this junction here is chemical. And so the very thing that allows my brain to trigger the impulse that causes me to squeeze my hand is a series of nerve fibers that go all the way down to my hand, but there are gaps all along the way. I think there was a movie, I think it was Crocodile Dundee, where there's a scene where someone gets shot with a dart out of a blowgun right in the neck, and the individual falls limp. Now, why he fell limp is because of something on the tip of that dart called Chiari. It gets in those junctions and it interrupts the flow of the nervous impulse. But there is one area in the body, one nerve that goes from the brain to the organ or the site of destination where there are no interruptions, no synapses, no junctions, no way that Chiari or something like that or a medication can interrupt it. And that is the nerve that goes to the adrenal glands. What that tells us is that tells us the adrenals are the lead dog. There's no reason to turn that impulse around. It's a fight and flight survival mechanism. So that nerve or that impulse gets to the adrenals, triggers stress, and it's a done deal. So if you've got a thyroid issue, if you've got constipation, if you have an autoimmune disease, if you have indigestion, if you have any of the things we've talked about and more, many of these things, in fact 94% surprisingly, are traced back to the adrenal glands, to your stress. So let's talk about the types of stress, because many of you might be just thinking about all the things we've talked about and are relating it only to emotional stress. That is the most common thing that people deal with, right, is emotional stress, but they're not aware of the others. Let's talk about the 3 categories. 1, physical stress. Let's just say that you're too heavy in the front, too weak in the low back. Maybe you've had a history of injuries, falls, sports, surgeries. Those are all reasons to have physical stress. Let's talk about the amount maybe you sit. If you're sitting for 8 hours a day, and then you drive home in your car, and then your form of diversion at home is sitting, and then you sleep on a bad mattress, let's just say that you do that every day, day in and day out. Just the time alone you spend in bed per lifetime if you're doing it right, is about 30 years. Couple that with how many years you spend in a chair, it is not much difference. 8 hours a day, sometimes more. Many of us are pulling 12-hour shifts. 8-hour shifts is just, that's a thing of the past. To stay competitive in this world, you're sitting down a lot. And the truth is, sitting is the new smoking. So the physical stress adds up. Another kind of stress that most people are not readily aware of is the biochemical stress. Okay, biochemical stress, let's think about what that might be. You're thinking right now, I don't work with chemicals. That's okay. The number one reason for an ER visit related to anxiety is dehydration. Dehydration, think about it. Water is in every aspect of your body. It's been rumored that 78% of the body is water. It's more than that. The truth is if we're not hydrating, if we're not getting enough water, every chemical process in our body is going to be sluggish. Same goes for oxygen. So if we're not driving oxygen into our cells through exercise, again, our biochemical stress is going to be off the charts. Let's talk about some other forms of biochemical stress though. Caffeine, medications, food intolerances. Just being on medications alone can cause stress. Now, don't take yourself off of any medications that Dr. Arter said so. Do me that favor. But realize that there is no medication that doesn't have a side effect. Now, if we talk about the emotional side of stress, let's talk about some things you're probably readily aware of with regards to emotional stress. Teenagers, fiscal cliffs, near government collapses, election cycles. The list goes on, but self-image, love at home. So the list goes on. But just to talk a little bit, let's take these one at a time. Physical stress is a big deal. Now, as a chiropractor, we care a lot about your physical structure. All of the tissues in the body are willing to forgive us most of the time. Let's talk about the discs of your spine, right? Disc herniations under surgery, that's a thing of the past. 20 years ago, that was the bread and butter of spinal surgeons. Nowadays, they're saying only 2% need surgery. But I'll tell you this, that's not the only tissue that we have to worry about. You got ligaments that can become fixated and you get stuck in certain positions that you've assumed for a long time. They say after the age of 30, you start to specialize. So if you're sitting all the time, all week long, and then on Saturday you go out to play your weekend warrior type game, you go play a pickup game of basketball, it's no wonder that you're going to pull a muscle. You're used to sitting all the time. But beyond that, we've got muscles, ligaments, tendons, discs. They all will forgive you, but the one tissue in the body that does not want to forgive are your bones. So when things get out of sorts and you start to slouch or you sit all the time, the bones have to buttress your posture. What I mean by that is even after you've stopped growing, your body's going to lay down bone to support the thing you do the most. And if my head is always out here, or I'm always slouching like this, my bones are going to try and support that. I'm going to start buttressing. Now, we know of that, most of us know of this as arthritis. The truth is, it's actually called degeneration. We only call it arthritis if it hurts. And then you can get all the way through to stage 4, degeneration, without even really knowing it's happening. Next thing you know, a doctor takes an x-ray of your spine and you've got no curvatures in your neck or low back, and your body has started to model or lay down extra bone, or buttress, as we like to call it. And the reason we worry about that as chiropractors is because once those nerves get pinched by the bone, or once the bones start to interfere with the nervous system, there's nothing really we can do. We call it stenosis. That's the chiropractor's worst enemy. So we got to protect our posture. Now, not many people know this, but out of every segment of bone in the spine, at every joint, there's a nerve that exits the spine. And the nerve itself goes to a destination. In fact, they've mapped out the nervous system to find out that most of us are pretty much the same. The C4 nerve root goes to the thyroid. The T6 in the middle of your body here goes to the gallbladder. L3, 4, and 5 go to the sciatic nerve, the bowels, the bladder, the sex organs. So we want to protect these nerves, and so as a chiropractor, that's the first place we go. But chiropractic is much, much more than just an adjustment of the spine. If you've never been to a chiropractor before, if you're listening to this for the first time, you've probably heard of chiropractors as far as what they do as being bone crunchers or back crackers. From the very inception of chiropractic is much, much more than that. The art and science of chiropractic is to get to the root cause of disease. Now, we have a funny way of saying disease in chiropractic. We call it dis-ease. And just think about what that word means. Things in the body are no longer happening with much ease. A lot of work is required. So if you're finding it's harder to sit up straight, or it's harder to eat and digest your food without having some sort of bloating or indigestion, there may be some interference in your spine at the central computer, which is our nervous system. But I want to go far beyond that. Chiropractic is the only branch of healthcare left that still believes that you were meant to function without the use of drugs or surgery. Think about that. It's nearly every year that they invite us as chiropractors to start prescribing narcotics. And every year, chiropractors turn them down at their option. Isn't that crazy? Chiropractors actually spend more time in the classroom than MDs. We're trained much the same. The only thing we don't really focus on is pharmaceuticals. We do take courses in it, but we're not trained to prescribe because we really don't want to. That's outside of our wheelhouse. That's not what we really intend to do. So we got to protect the physical structure. Well, I want to tell you a story about a patient who illustrates or epitomizes the philosophies of chiropractic perfectly. Her name is Brittany, and Brittany had a disc herniation in her lower spine at L5. This interfered with her sciatic nerve. She had pain going down the back of her leg. She also had a disc herniation in her neck. Statistically speaking, most people, if they have had one, they will have a second in their lifetime. But she had numbness in her arm and pain down her leg. Now, Brittany came in and we treated her and she did fantastic. And I came in and I said, Brittany, you are doing great. Now, Brittany also had headaches and everything had pretty much resolved. And she says, well, I'm not done yet. I said, well, what do you mean? She says, I have all this other stuff we need to work on. I said, well, tell me about it. She says, well, I'm bloated every time I eat. I have brain fog. I don't know why I go into certain rooms in my house. You know, I'll go in there and sometimes I forget why I'm there. I drink soda. I smoke. My dad has had a double lap band surgery. My mom has had type 2 diabetes. And I don't feel like I'm on a very good path. I'm also overweight. I said, okay, all that other stuff, that makes sense. Let's get started. So we found out she actually had a candida overgrowth. If you don't know what that is, babies will get it on the back of their tongue. We call it thrush. It's that white film you see. So you may want to check in the mirror right now, see if you have that. But it's a yeast overgrowth. And if it gets systemic, it can become a real problem for the rest of the body. For her, this was causing her brain fog. It was also causing her bloating. She had developed over time with all of this a gluten intolerance. So we started working on that. We got her off the cigarettes. We got her off the soda. We cleaned up her diet. She started losing all this weight. She got her brain back. She was able to focus again. It was amazing. She was doing fantastic. She came in one day and I said, Brittany, you look fantastic. I don't even recognize you. She says, yeah, but I think you're adjusting me wrong. I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, my headaches are back. I said, your headaches are back? I actually checked her alignment. She had an issue at C1 and her atlas was off most of the time before we got her to this point. And I said, your atlas is holding. There's no reason why I'm going to adjust you today. But when's the last time you had your eyes checked? She says, well, you know, actually that's been on my mind. It's been a really long time since I had my glasses updated. And I wonder if they need to be changed or updated or increased or maybe my eyes have gotten worse. And I said, Brittany, let's think about this. All that you've done, I think your eyes have gotten better. She says, is that even possible? I said, yeah, it happened to me. She says, all right. I said, go to the optometrist and I want you to report back. So about a week and a half later, she comes back in and she says, Doc, you were right. My eyes got better and you got me pregnant. I said, what? That's not even possible. She says, no, let me start over. She says, I've never been fertile. I said, what do you mean? She says, well, I've just never been fertile. I've never even worried about being pregnant. And now here I am, pregnant. Here's the interesting thing about Brittany. Through the course of her pregnancy, she went to her OB and she discovered that she had 2 uteri. 2 uteruses, 2 uteri, I don't know how you would say that. But she had 2. And if you know anything about that, most of the time, individuals that have 2 of those don't get pregnant. One's usually too small, one's deformed. But she thankfully carried her beautiful baby boy full term. Now you might ask the question, at least I did, what did we do that allowed Brittany to get pregnant? Well, think about it. We can look in the back of someone's eye with an ophthalmoscope and tell if somebody's diabetic or has high blood pressure. The optic nerve can be destroyed by sugar. In fact, it's one of the hardest things on the body, or on that part of the body. It's the #1 reason for blindness beyond the age of 27, high blood sugar. Interestingly enough, we also changed the structure of her spine. L5, that nerve root that was pinched by a disc, goes to the sex organs. But we also know that candida will hijack the nervous system, oftentimes causes infertility, bloating, and brain fog. It's really hard for us to point to one thing that allowed her to be fertile. The truth is real health, true health, when you have it, all ships rise with a rising tide. Everything should get better. I mean, we should get more energy. We should sleep better. We should be happier. We should have less pain. And in all of these areas, she improved. It's a beautiful story, but I think it illustrates perfectly chiropractic. All right, let's talk about chemical stress. Chemical toxicity. To illustrate this point, there was a study done in 2012 where 10 individuals were tested for 413 known chemical toxins. Of those 413, they found an average of 287 per person. Now, of those 287, 213 had been banned since the 1960s. To give you an idea, in 2004 alone, there was a recorded 600 million pounds of industrial waste pumped into the air we breathe. There's 1,000 known contaminants in the food that we drink and 1,050 in the food we eat. Couple that with 106 personal care products, where women use an average of 12 and men an average of 6. And you can see that toxins will add up pretty darn quickly. But the 287 man-made toxins that were found in these people, these 10 individuals, they know for a matter of fact through this study that these toxins did not find their way in the bodies of these individuals by what they drank, ate, breathed in, or put on their skin. Think about that for a sec. You may be scratching your head going, how is that even possible? Well, 287 toxins per average person. The scary part about this is that those 10 people hadn't been born yet. These were 10 individuals that were still in the womb. The blood was drawn beyond the placental barrier. If you know anything about birth, baby can have AB positive blood, mom can have O negative blood. The blood between mom and baby never really interact. And so when you think about that, that means that the very structure of which this baby was built, from mom's contributions, embedded in that baby's total structure, were toxins that came from mom. It's interesting. There's a documentary called King Corn. If you have a chance, check it out. It's fascinating. 2 college students plant a whole field of corn and then go to a college nearby and have themselves tested to see how much of the carbon in their body was actually from corn. 60% of the carbon in our bodies, on average, they found, is from corn. 20% of the calories in our body come from soy. So all of these things are incorporated into the baby that's being formed in the womb. Now think about where you might be in this then. If a baby unborn has an average of 287 toxins, where are you? We must be worse off. And what they're finding out now is that 1 in 3 Caucasian children that are 5 years old today, by the time they're juniors in high school, will have type 2 diabetes. If you're African American or Hispanic, it's 1 in 2 due to genetic predisposition. Now you might be thinking, that's crazy, but ask yourself, am I making that stat up? Here in Colorado, we happen to be in the skinniest state of the nation. Now, back in 1996, 10% obese was what we found out. Nowadays, we're finding out that over 20% of the population in Colorado is obese. We're tying now with Wyoming and Montana. But what do we know about Wyoming and Montana? Wyoming and Montana have more cows than they have people. So for them to tie with us, they would have had to have gotten really, really healthy, really, really fast, because statistically speaking, that's a small group. Or Coloradians would have had to have gotten very obese very quickly. And I would just tell you, from all of the research we've done, Colorado is slipping a little bit. Now think about that though. Diabetes, 1 in 3 teenagers in juniors in high school, if they're Caucasian, 1 in 2 if you're African American or Hispanic, that's a lot of diabetes. That may be the very thing that's bankrupting our health system. So let's talk about stress. We talked about there's 3 types of stress: biochemical, physical, mental, emotional. Now the stress we're experiencing, when you think of any of those kind, they all drive one product, and it drives cortisol. You might have heard of a cortisone shot before. Maybe you threw too many pitches in college, your shoulder's wearing out, your hip's wearing out, so we get a cortisone shot. There's no real difference between cortisone and cortisol, but the body makes cortisol. Cortisol comes in and it does a few amazing things. 1, it drives down inflammation. It also drives up blood sugar. So if you're the wildebeest and you're running from the lion, you want to make sure you've got a high amount of simple sugar in your bloodstream as fuel so you can get out of there. But the other thing that cortisol does is cortisol causes us to pack on pounds. Think about what your lion is in your life right now. Chances are you're not running from a real lion. But what if your lion is made out of paperwork? Maybe a stack of paperwork this big, or a bad relationship at home, a health crisis, financial issues, a bad boss at work, struggling in any other way. Your body is under stress and it's going to be producing cortisol. Well, cortisol has a way of driving up blood sugar. But if you're not physically running from that stressor, that sugar's left to hang around. We have a name for that. It's a bad word. It's a 3-letter word. It starts with F. You probably guessed it, fat. So our body's really smart. It's not going to pack all that fat in one leg. We'd never get away from the lions in our life. So it puts it in the middle. So if you're collecting fat in the middle. Cortisol, chances are, is running rampant. Now, think about what you've seen since 1980. The food industries have pulled, in 1980, all the fat and cholesterol out of food. Things started to become titled light or fat-free or cholesterol-free. The problem is when they did that, they pulled out all the flavor. So what did they have to put in place? You guessed it, they put sugar. Well, since 1980, diabetes and obesity have quadrupled. Now we're calling this diabesity because they often travel together, but you won't hear me say that very often because nowadays there's something even worse coming about. It's type 3 diabetes. Now type 3 diabetes starts when someone starts to lose their memory. There's actually a type 1.5 diabetes as well, which we can talk about. It's part autoimmune, part lifestyle. Think about this. Do you know of anybody in your life that is able to eat anything that they want and they don't gain a pound? You got it. These people we're worried about because they're not fat and they're not fit, but they're farce. We call these people oftentimes skinny fat. And it's a dangerous place to be because if you're eating something and every time you eat you got to put a notch in your belt, that's a pretty good governor. But if you're eating whatever you want and you don't gain a pound, you may be the sickest person in the room. Now, the reason we worry about this is because stress essentially triggers fat and sugar and oxidative stress. The #1 killer in America is heart disease. In fact, heart disease being the #1 cause of death in America, 1 in 2.8 people will have a heart attack in their lifetime. Now, when you're under stress, we talked a little bit about this called vasoconstriction, where the blood vessels get smaller. And they do that because they want to get the blood to the destination faster. It's the same reason why you can go from sprinkling your flowers 1 minute to tightening down the hose and spraying the neighbor kid across the street the next. And it gets the blood there faster by shrinking the hose. But your stress does that. What else does that? Cholesterol does that. It's been blamed on cholesterol anyways, but I think Dr. Sinatra and Dr. Mark Houston both would have a different opinion. Dr. Sinatra wrote a book called The Great Cholesterol Myth. It's a great book. It should be on everyone's home library. #1 reason I say that is because it's what's going to kill most of us. So when we say cholesterol is a myth, cholesterol is not the enemy here. Your brain is actually made of mostly cholesterol. Your eye is 50% cholesterol. Your sex hormones are cholesterol. Your neurotransmitters that make you feel normal and not depressed are cholesterol. Your cells, every cell in your body, every cell wall in your body is made of cholesterol. So lowering cholesterol is not really a great idea. In fact, we're finding out that it is one of the leading causes of dementia and many other issues. Again, if you're taking medications, don't take my word for it and go off of it, but get connected with a functional medicine doctor or a chiropractor who can help you get off your meds by working together in tandem with your primary care physician. But when the cholesterol is floating around in the body, think of that as big balloons in a room, big yellow balloons. How do you get a balloon to stick to the wall? You rub it on your head, right? Well, statically charging that balloon is a good illustration for what we're talking about in the body. You've got all these yellow balloons. Let's just pretend we have yellow balloons filling this room. They're fine. It doesn't matter how many we really have. What matters is if they're getting oxidized. When they become oxidized, the body no longer sees them as self. And the problem with that is your body sends out its immune system to vacuum up the damage. These little macrophages, also known as monocytes, will go out and gobble up your oxidized LDL cholesterol. And when they do that, they themselves die. And they bury themselves in the lumen of the artery, and that's known as a foam cell, known to you and I as plaque. Now, oxidation here is the enemy. If we're using medication to lower our cholesterol, guess what? 75% of all heart attacks last year had normal LDL cholesterol. In fact, the statin companies have made their own studies. They did a study with 10,000 people, 5,000 people who didn't take cholesterol-lowering medication and 5,000 that did, and they found that those who did not live 1 day longer than those that didn't. The truth is, lowering cholesterol is kind of like mopping up the floor while the sink overflows. We need cholesterol. In fact, when you're stressed, cholesterol goes up. When your thyroid is underactive, your cholesterol goes up. Your body knows that it needs to shuttle more of your building blocks to make neurotransmitters, also hormones, your brain, parts of your body, to replenish you after you've been through the battle or the gauntlet, which we call stress. So lowering it may not be the best idea. The problem is that when your body's creating plaque, it does it through something called homocysteine. And there's a reason why you've probably never heard of that before. Your doctor won't readily test it. Now, they'll test it if they think you're about to have a stroke. But not readily tested in most offices. The reason why is because there's no drug on the planet that will lower homocysteine. The best thing to do if you want to lower homocysteine, that oxidizing agent of your LDL cholesterol, is clean living, and to de-stress your system chemically and emotionally and physically. Now, when we talk about the nervous system, the whole body's wired to it, right? There's not one thing in your body that's not influenced by your nervous system. Every cell in your body, every hair, even your fingernails are alive. And the problem with that is only 10% in your nervous system, and some would even argue in some circles that 6% of your nervous system is dedicated to how you feel. That means that the pain you feel, it's only 10% of your nervous system's job. What's the other part doing? What's the other 90% of your nervous system for? Function. Now, the statistics are scary on this because we don't always feel disease coming on. The biggest, baddest killer in America is heart disease. And again, I would argue, and you would probably agree, that stress is the driver. But 50% of heart attacks, the first symptom is the heart attack. 20% of people, the first symptom is death. That's why we call it a silent killer. So you walk outside tomorrow morning and you, across the picket fence, you're getting the newspaper and you see your next door neighbor Joe. You say, "Hey Joe, are you healthy? Dr. Ardo wanted me to ask you." He says, "I feel great." And the next day, he dies from a heart attack. Now, does that happen? It does happen. Unfortunately, it happens all too often, to the point now that it's the top killer in the country. Now, in terms of what cortisol does, it does more than just that. One of the reasons that stress is so important is because cortisol is also guilty of weakening your muscles. And the muscle in your body that's experiencing the most contact with your blood is your heart. And so your heart can become weak after a time of being exposed to cortisol, especially if that's your day in, day out routine. But there's much more. It causes a decrease in metabolism, depression, hypertension, chronic fatigue, sleep deprivation, migraines, tunnel vision, acid reflux, hostility, hunger, arthritis, infertility, decreased immune system strength. But raise your hand if you want a faster metabolism. Don't we all? It's all cortisol. So when we talk about all of this, it's important to note also one important fact. It is the number one reason, that is, stress is the number one reason for missed work. You think about that. No one ever calls in stress. They call in sick. But they've done studies and show that this is the number one reason why most people call in sick. They just need a day off. All right, this brings us to this one important point. What are you eating? Now, I grew up in a home where we'd go to the grocery store and my mother would say, "Honey, we're going to shop the horseshoe." Now, some of you might know what that means. You're shopping the outside perimeter, because the outside perimeter is the only thing where you can plug things in, the only place you can plug things in. That means if it has life to preserve, it has life to give. Now, minus the frozen pizzas and the ice cream, right? But electrons are important. In fact, for food to be food, it has to do three things. It has to donate electrons. That means give you life. It also has to give you nutrients, vitamins, and minerals. And the last thing is it has to clean you on its way through. For food to be food, it has to follow those three rules. If it breaks any one of those rules, chances are it's food stuff. Back in 1999, these companies got together for kind of a secret meeting at Pillsbury headquarters. There was no Klieg lights, no red carpet. But they got together for really one important reason. And they said, the very attorneys that were lurking around Philip Morris, Marlboro, and Winston are now lurking around us. And what they're looking to do is trying to pin down that we've been advertising harmful substances to children. It's not a matter of if the increase in heart disease, cancer, and diabetes is there. It's that it's there because of the food companies, these boxed and bagged foods. In fact, as a kid, my mother taught us that if we were eating out of a box or a bag, it'd put us in a box or a bag. Well, that's a morbid thought. We're finding out it's more and more true. Now, throughout this meeting, they began to have their hearts turned. Two CEOs in particular walked the line. And they were talking about strategies as how to change the situation. They had the money, they have the power. But at the very end of the meeting, the most powerful man in the room, the CEO of General Mills, stood up and said something that changed everyone's hearts. Essentially, this is it. He said, "Look, we're not doing anything wrong. Let them buy what they're going to buy. Let them eat what they're going to eat." And in his little discourse, everyone kind of walked out of the room lukewarm. Since then, we've had the advent of the Go-Gurt, which is dessert level status. It's not really yogurt. You know what I'm talking about because you've frozen it and eaten it, and it tastes really good. All of these foods actually taste really good, and they've done something very unique to the food. They've short-circuited a part of our brain called the Yowell circuit. The Yowell circuit is the part of the brain that tells you when to stop eating, and it's triggered by fiber. Now, Michael Moss went to Kraft, I believe, and he said, look guys, what you're doing, it's all salt, it's all sugar, it's all fat. You're manipulating the taste buds of people. You're hot wiring their taste buds. And they said, yeah, we understand that, but try this, Michael. And they gave him a Cheez-It that had no salt on it. What do you guess that it tastes like? You guessed right, cardboard. And so when you think about what they can do and what they will do, it's two different things. Since then, we've also had the not so lunchable Lunchables and many things like that. But these food stuffs, or like we like to call them Franken foods, because they've all been created in a laboratory with men wearing white coats, designed for one purpose and one intention, is to link into your brain and get you coming back for more. Michael talks about one more thing. He says their new buzzword is vanishing caloric density. If you can get that food into the mouth and to disappear faster, the chances of somebody eating another or something like it goes up. This is why they can bank on the bet that you won't just eat one. Now the problem with this is that this is the first generation to ever be obese and starving at the same time. Now, think back to when you were a kid. In your grade school, how many kids were obese? In my grade school, back in Washington State, there were 2. There was one girl who was obese, and then her brother came to school. We knew that there was something metabolically wrong, and there really, really was. But nowadays, look around. How many people are obese? In states like Alabama, it's well over 30, breaching 40% of the population. That's kind of scary when you think about it, because the leading cause of death is associated with metabolic syndrome, which has to do with this obesity epidemic, heart disease, diabetes. So the problem is that if you've ever heard of someone winning the lottery and it's ruined their life, we can use this analogy for the body. Think of calories in your body as income or money. Calories really just give your body the energy to do things. They give no direction, but they give a lot of energy. They're just like money. Money is the power to do. Well, what happens if somebody just gets a lump of money dropped in their lap and they're overnight a millionaire? The problem with this is there was no education on how to get wealthy or stay wealthy, so likely they don't. And truth is, there's a lot of divorce and bankruptcy and drugs and things like that come about because they weren't ready for that just massive ability to do things. The truth is the same with the body. Your body has all these calories, but no information or education on how to do things. That education comes through vitamins and minerals. The instruction on how to behave. It actually helps your genes know what to do, which genes to turn on, which genes to turn off. And that combination of the right calorie count and the right nutrients changes everything for the body. But when it's all calories and no nutrients, and couple that with sedentary lifestyle, we get a lack of insulin, too much sugar, and oxidative stress. That's the perfect recipe for carcinogenesis, the creation and formation of cancer. Now the same thing is true if you take another route. Maybe too little sex hormone binding globulin, which is an important thing, too many estrogens in our food or in our environment, and that also causes carcinogenesis. The problem is in the last 4 years, we've found cancer 4 times in our office. Patients that had no idea that they had it. We got to get to the fridge. 200 years ago, the average American family of 4 spent $200 per year. That's on everything. Food, it's tools, mules, feed, seed. It's everything. And I ask you, just 200 years ago, how many trips to the grocery store do you think the average family of 4 took? 0. There was no grocery store around. In fact, the first grocery store was the Piggly Wiggly, if you remember this, from 1916. Now, the only way to keep food fresh before that, let's just say beef, the only way to keep the beef fresh was to let it roam the property. Okay, so you're growing your food in your backyard, you're letting your beef walk the property. If you bought an egg back then, what would happen if you got a little bit too warm? It might hatch. And then at that point, your egg problems are over. Nowadays, the only way you can patent anything that nature has made is to render that item infertile. The truth is, you can't plant apple seeds and get that you buy in the apples at the store and plant them and expect an apple tree. It just doesn't happen. I worked for the world's largest tree nursery in Washington State called Willow Drive. An amazing place ran by great people. But we've lost the original apple. We've got a mixture of creations and things that have been made, but we haven't the ability to go back in time and capture that real apple. Fast forward to today, the average family of 4 spends $10,500 per year on just food alone. Now, the cost of food has actually gone down, but the trips that we take to the grocery store are tenfold what they used to be when they first came out. Now, as we're talking about food, let me ask you this. The cost of food's gone down dramatically. What do you think's happened to the quality of our food? It's gone down as well. In fact, it's inversely proportional to the rate of chronic disease. 8 out of 10 people will die from a chronic disease. That's kind of scary if you think about it. Earl L. Butz, the Secretary of Agriculture under Richard M. Nixon, said that the best kept secret in the world is that the United States makes cheap food. In fact, he's the one that took farmers off the subsidy program where they were paying farmers not to farm. He said that most of every expense, or most of the family expenses in the world, other than the United States, is to feed the family. What do you think that we spend most of our income on in this country? It's not housing, it's not food. In fact, Ben Bernanke of the Federal Reserve has said not housing, not food, but health care. Going back to 2008, the average family of four spent $15,609 on health care per year. Now, fast forward to just 2013, and it's $22,030 per year. In 2014, 15, 16, 17, that cost has only gone up. Now, if we made all the drugs free and available in unlimited supply tomorrow, do you think that we'd be healthier as a country? Truth is, we wouldn't. In fact, is there any pill, powder, potion, or lotion that can make up for good exercise, good nutrition, or adequate love at home? Not likely. We spend more on healthcare than any other country in the world. In fact, 2 times second place, which is Canada. If you ask the World Health Organization who the healthiest countries in the world are, the United States of America ranks 37th place. That's behind Colombia, Chile, Dominica, right? Who do you think is in first place? It's France. But what does France do that's different than the United States? I can give you right now, I'll tell you, it's not socialized healthcare. I'll tell you, it's one thing we know for sure is that they don't shop like we shop. How often do they go to the grocery store? Every single day. And how do they get there? They walk or they ride their bikes. How big are the refrigerators? They're small. Now, in the United States, we make up 4% of the entire world population, but we spend 50% of the world's healthcare dollars. What does the term ROI represent? Or for ROI indicates return on investment. We're spending about $2.5 trillion a year on healthcare, and that's not getting us very far. So far, it's gotten us to 37th place. If we spend more than that, will we go higher in the list? Chile, Dominica, Colombia hardly have a healthcare system each, and yet they're healthier than we are per capita. So I ask you, what is the answer to this? Well, rather than investing so much in health insurance, maybe we need to spend a little bit of time investing in what we call health assurance. In fact, chiropractic and functional medicine are both really the art and science of getting to the cause of the problems that we face in our health. If your body's under stress, like we've talked about, physical, mental, emotional, or biochemical, getting to the root of that stress is oftentimes what solves the problem of dis-ease. So 4% of the world population is made up of the United States, but 50% of the world's healthcare dollars is spent by us. You might ask the question, 50% of the world's healthcare dollars, what is that? It's about $2.5 trillion. Now, why such a bad return on investment if we're ranking 37th healthiest country in the world? Well, the truth is because spending more money is not going to make you healthier. The truth is you were designed to be healthy, not sick. In fact, the cool thing about functional medicine, chiropractic, is that the body was designed for health. Our job is just to find those things that are getting in your way and pull them out. Oftentimes it's not an extra organ problem. Just getting one organ removed, 2 organs removed, or a medication deficiency. Headaches are not a Tylenol deficiency. Osteoporosis is not a Fosamax or Boniva deficiency. We get into these problems of health in real ways, and there are also real solutions. Oftentimes if toxicity is a problem, we detox a patient to get them healthy. If food is a problem, we feed them to get healthy. And it's all about spinning backwards through the current condition. And it's oftentimes what provides the most relief, and again, the most energy, the best sleep, least pain. And so we have a couple of concerns here at Thrive Health Systems, and that is that medicine is not on a really good path. One of our missions here is to change healthcare. You might think that that's a tall order, and it is. But when you think about it this way, if you were in an airplane and you flew around the world, but you were off by just 1 degree in your coordinates, when you got back to what you thought was home, your longitudinal equivalent of home, you'd be 500 miles off course. We believe that healthcare is off by just 2 degrees. Now that's a lot to ask of a patient to walk over 1,000 miles to get to health. Or you could just really ask the doctor to change his golf swing 2 degrees. Here at Thrive Health Systems, we are committed to that. And I want to share with you one thing. These are some statistics that may shock you. And it's not that we are anti-medicine, But there are a number of doctors who are medical doctors who are anti-medicine, and the studies are without refute. 83% of doctors are disillusioned with medicine. It means that they went in with one purpose, to save people, to help them, and they've come out with red tape handcuffs. 63% are thinking of quitting in the next 2 years. A Medscape study in 2012 reported that 46% of medical doctors wouldn't do it all over again, and 60% would not recommend their career in medicine. 6%, a whopping 6%, would describe the morale among their health professional friends and colleagues as positive. It gets a little sadder than this. In 2015, a TED Talk speaker, Dr. Pamela Wimble, said that 1 million patients lose their doctors every year to suicide. Now, studies also show that when a doctor incorporates the Thrive Health system in their practice, that they touch more than 30,000 patients in a positive way. So we invite you to come on this journey with us, to investigate health in a little different way, to get to the root of disease. Now, to finish this up, I'm going to finish with an article that Time magazine did in 2009, December issue. It was called The Sorry State of American Health. And they said essentially this: the biggest problem with the U.S. healthcare system is that it has long been designed to respond to illness rather than prevent it. It goes on to report that Dr. Nancy Nielsen, the president of the AMA, says we're living longer but not living healthier. Why is that? Well, I had the privilege of living in Brazil for 2 years. I got dengue fever. It's a mosquito-borne illness, and I went to the hospital. Now, generally speaking, you'll go to the hospital for about 15 days. I used to see people walking up and down the street and flipping over, spare tires and paint cans, anything that was collecting standing water to prevent dengue from forming. That's preventative health care. Now, let me ask you, do you want someone walking into your house in the morning wearing a white jumpsuit, white hat, white coat, and tipping over your breakfast plate, trying to prevent health care problems or prevent disease? I don't either. And so the best doctor that you know is you. Your body was designed for health. We just have to make sure it happens by getting the wrong things out, putting the right things in. It's a simple equation. Now, just to finish up, we had a patient come in not too long ago with blood sugar of 580. That's near a diabetic coma, 20 points away. He had gone to the hospital, they saved his life. They said, "You have diabetes." When I approached him, I said, "Look, there's a percentage of diabetes, especially type 2 diabetes is what I'm talking about, that's reversible." And he says, "I don't believe you, but what do we got to do to get started?" I said, "Well, we're not going to treat your diabetes. We're going to treat your health. And so we need to do a blood test to find out how healthy you are and how sick you are." And so we did a whole battery of tests to find out where he was. Through that, we were able to find out his blueprint, what needed to come out and what needed to be put in. In 30 days, he was down 28 pounds and off of his insulin and off of his metformin. By his doctor's own recommendation, he went off the medication. He called me up or texted me on Thanksgiving and said, "I just finished Thanksgiving with my family." And I thought, why didn't I tell him not to eat the stuffing? Well, he says, "It's okay though," in his text message. "My blood sugar is at 88. The truth is, disease can be reversed. I've depressed you enough, right? I want you to think about this. This is your homework. I want you to go online and look up the book Blue Zones Project. This is a gentleman who partnered with National Geographic to study areas in the world where people live past 100 in healthy, high-density populations. They all shared something in common. There were 5 locations: Sardinia, Italy; Okinawa, Japan; Loma Linda, California; Hohansha, Costa Rica; and Ikaria, Greece. Now, those 5 locations all shared something in common. They all woke up in the morning with a purposeful life. They had a purpose when they got up in the morning. Okinawa, Japan has some fun names for this, so we're going to say those. They had an ikigai. That's their purpose in the morning. Now, what's your ikigai? What's your reason for getting up in the morning? In the video, you'll see that there's a 105-year-old lady who says the reason she gets up in the morning is because she wants to hold her great-great-granddaughter. She said when she holds her great-great-granddaughter, she feels like she's leaping into heaven. You might be thinking at 105 years old, she's close. Well, truth is there's some robust people in these populations. They rarely eat meat. In Okinawa, they call this the Hara Hara Hashi Bu diet. And they only eat until they're 20% full. They make all of their food in the kitchen and bring it to the table rather than putting it on the table so they can help themselves again and again. They live in tight-knit communities. They have best friends. In fact, in Okinawa, Japan, they have 5.5 best friends. How many best friends do you think the average American has? Because Facebook friends don't count, it's only 1.5. A real tall one and a real short one. Just kidding. The other thing is that they also grow their own gardens and they're highly physically active. Now you'll watch in this video a man in Greece who's walking up a cobblestone path and he's carrying 2 large buckets of water on his shoulders. When's the last time you saw your grandfather or grandmother past 80 carry anything like that? Well, the truth is they know in their core that movement is life. And they know that by eating like they do, eating from the earth, that they build a strong body. Now, lastly, how do you pull yourself off the cliffs of insanity? Because doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results has not worked yet. The truth is you can't ignore your warning signs. Funny story is our CEO here at Thrive Health Systems a couple years ago went to get his oil changed at a local shop. They drained the oil, they put in a new oil filter, but they didn't put the oil back in. They made it a surprising 2 weeks and his engine seized up. Now, this goes back to that quote and that adage we all know, is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. What are your warning signs? Well, let's list off a few. Headaches, numbness and tingling, asthma, allergies, sinus infections, sciatica, sinus pressure, acid reflux, gastrointestinal distress, irritable bowel syndrome, constipation, ulcers, depression, irritability, and fatigue, just to name a few. We get to see those go away every day here by getting to the root cause. So don't ignore your warning signs. So we've covered a lot of ground today. I hope you've enjoyed the content. But if there's one thing I want you to take away from this message today, is this: you are what you continually renew. Don't ignore your check engine lights, and let's renew health. This has been Dr. Erik Arter with Thrive Health Systems. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you want more information on the topics we've discussed, go to thrivehealthsystems.com and have a great day.